God's walked in.
Rejoice together, for the time we are living in is the time for reclaiming our own. Brothers, listen to me, to me, to me.
Did you know, 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 did you know that God's walk here? Did you know God's walk here?
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to On Deck, Being Black in America. My name is D-Moss. I am your host. I am joined by our regular panelists, Ms. Minnie Jones, Hanif Nelson. Today we have two very special guests. We have Dr. Bridget Baldwin and we have Ryan McCullum. So today we have a lot to talk about with the decision recently made in the Breonna Taylor case. We want to come on and have a conversation. For those who are watching on Facebook, we were supposed to talk about, Black families, part 2. We had a great conversation last week. But with that decision, we felt it necessary to change it. Well, at least I felt it was necessary to change it and have this conversation about the verdict. And not only that, but also looking at, ensuring that our lives matter in terms of Black lives. What's next? They said 1 p.m. Saturday, July 28, 1917, a group of between 8,000 and 10,000 Black men, women, and children began marching through the streets of Midtown Manhattan in what became known as the first civil rights protest in American history. 1917 on till this day, we are still marching, we are still protesting, we are still complaining about the injustices being committed against Black people. The question today is, what's next? Across the country, we're protesting in front of city halls, town halls, police departments. And I think it's time to look in another direction. I think we need to have a conversation with the court systems, with folks involved in the judicial process. We need to have a conversation about the legislative process. And in order to do that, we have to have that conversation. So to get things started, Dr. Baldwin or Bridget, would you mind just doing a brief introduction of who you are and why we have you here today?
Oh, my name is Dr. Bridget Baldwin. I am a law professor at Western New England University School of Law. I'm a sociolegal scholar concentrating in criminal justice and race issues. So I teach a lot of those courses there. I also do the law notes editor. I'm a law notes editor for the Point of View newspaper as well.
Okay. And next up, we have Ryan McCullum. He's a political consultant. Ryan, can you introduce yourself? Tell people who you are, what you do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Ryan McCullum, born and raised in Springfield. I'm a political consultant, so I help people get elected and help them stay elected. I worked in the legislature. I worked in the state senate for 3 different state senators. I worked for the first Black governor in Massachusetts, Deval Patrick, as a legislative director as well. And now, like I said earlier, I help people not only get elected, but stay elected when it comes to the legislative process and to think about policy first and foremost when it comes to being in office.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. And we have another guest invited by Ms. Minnie Jones, Mark Austin. Mark, can you introduce yourself?
You're on mute. Mark Austin. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. No, I'm just a design artist actually from the area, the Western Mass area. Also a cannabis cultivator, and I have a design business as well.
Okay. All right. With that being said, let's get this thing started. Now, I want to make for our guests, I want to make sure you understand I am not an expert. I don't know a lot about the judicial process, if any, nor do I know a lot about the legislative process, which is why we're here. Dr. Baldwin, I'm going to start with you. As we talk about the outcome of the Breonna Taylor case, can we talk about, why, give us some insight in terms of how the judicial process works? I'm not all that familiar with the grand jury, prosecution, all that stuff. Can you just give us some background on the process that they had undergone?
Okay, so after a arrest is made and the point of the grand jury or it can sometimes be what's called a prosecutor's information, is to make sure that police officers have probable cause and to make sure that there's probable cause to continue the case. So the process of a grand jury is only required actually in federal court. So state courts can do grand jury or prosecutor's information, which is essentially the same thing. And it's a very low standard because it's the same standard that police officers use to arrest. It's a one-sided proceeding. The prosecutor presents their case to the grand jurors. The defense doesn't really get the opportunity, sometimes doesn't even know that their client is being indicted. And the only time that a defense participates in a grand jury process is if the defendant is going to testify. And that's usually not in the traditional sense that we're used to seeing at a trial. The prosecutor asks all the questions or the grand jurors ask all the questions. And at the end of the day, what they're trying to decide is whether or not probable cause exists to bind the person over for trial. So again, it's a very low standard. It's not the standard for conviction. And so that's pretty much the process. And a prosecutor's information is something much quicker that can occur. I believe that happened in the Darren Wilson case with the Michael Brown case, and that was the big controversy there. So it's the same type of proceeding.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody have any questions? Hanif, anybody? Okay, so there's a short clip I wanted to play as we get into it. I know some folks want to talk about Breonna Taylor. Some folks want to talk about the case. We're going to see if I can get this right. There's a clip that I seen by Joy DeGray that I just want to play, let people take a look at.
What this indictment says of just this one officer, leaving the other two officers completely innocent, apparently, right? Officers Cosgrove and Mattingly did nothing wrong, according to this indictment. It means that if you live in the state of Kentucky, if you were ever associated in any way with somebody who was caught in the criminal justice system, even if they are no longer associated with you and no longer live in your home, police have the full right and are fully within the law to bust into your apartment while you're asleep after midnight and start shooting and can kill you as long as they aim. Say it again. As long as they aim their weapon at you or at anyone in the apartment, they are within the law, according to this indictment, according to AG Daniel Cameron. Police then have the full right to kill you because they're investigating an association that doesn't have anything to do with you committing a crime. You haven't done anything. They're not even accusing you of committing a crime. Apparently, I'm not sure they were sure who was in the apartment. They're just saying that apartment is associated with someone who was associated with you. So sorry, if they bust in and they start licking off shots and you get killed, your death is irrelevant to the law in the state of Kentucky. Your death doesn't matter. Your life doesn't matter. This was a Black Lives Don't Matter ruling because they said that her life was irrelevant, that the life of her boyfriend who was in the apartment with her didn't matter, that he attempting to defend her was the crime. The potential crime was him trying to defend his castle. So the castle doctrine is wiped away when police bust into your home. You don't have the right to defend yourself, don't have the right to survive. You don't have the right to have medical attention applied to you. These officers don't even have to try to save you. They can just shoot you. That is what I heard in this. Now, it didn't surprise me. I will say I have lost the capacity to be surprised. I'm never surprised anymore because here's the problem. The authority who will decide if your life is worth pursuing a case over is the partner of the police. Their partner who works with them to make cases, who works with them every day, who knows them by first name, probably sends them Christmas cards, knows who their kids are, their friend, their partner. The prosecutor will decide if your life matters. And guess what? In 99% of those cases, they will say it doesn't. That's what this ruling said this afternoon.
Joy, I appreciate your breakdown. I want to just
Okay, question, panelists, everybody. Should we be surprised? I mean, we're talking about Kentucky here, but should we be surprised in other parts of the country as well? Is she on point? Should we be shocked? How do we respond to this? Is that the only thing that came out of this? Is that the only message that came out of this case? So I'll just open that up to the panel.
We should not be shocked at all. This is not this isn't new news. This isn't something that, is just happening for the first time. And I think she's spot on with what she's saying. But I think the other thing that for me, when it comes out of this is that, it's nothing new, more of a reminder that they will look for anything that they can to keep themselves safe and not accountable. And they will brush away any lies that they deem inconvenient. And to say that they did nothing wrong when everything leading up to this, there was, the police report was a lie. Them saying that they identified themselves with a lie. Everything about what legally helped them, not be prosecuted or not be indicted by the grand jury was a lie. So none of this is surprising. I think she's right on point. And if anything, it's really what the topic of this particular show is about. It should embolden people to understand how the legislative process works, how the court system works, because what we've been doing is not enough.
Okay, thanks, Lee.
I agree. I agree 100%, and I agree with what she said. And the issue is the no-knock, right? So the no-knock warrant, how easily the judge signed off on a no-knock warrant on what might have been a tertiary place, right? So like the ex-boyfriend may have gotten packages there once or twice. And so all of a sudden a judge is going to sign off on a no-knock warrant, which is a pretty aggressive warrant, which means you can just bang a door down. I don't think so. So when we talk about the legislative process, and that's what I want to bring to the table,
Absolutely.
is that it's not, you can change the legislation, but if it's not applied equally to people of color, then it doesn't matter, right? And so I live in Long Meadow. They're not going to bang my door down because I live in Long Meadow. Now, if I lived in Springfield and I lived in Chestnut Towers, the judge is going to absolutely give them a no-knock right away. But they're not going to give a no-knock right away at 12 Long Meadow Street. The judge is going to ask, well, who's there? Why are you going to do this? Why are you going to do that? So while the legislative process is important, it is also important to realize that you can change the law all you want, but if it's not applied equally and it's applied actually unfairly to people of color, then we still have an issue.
Okay, Ryan, let me ask. I talked to a couple of attorney friends, and they had said before we go, Shauna, before we go to Bridget Baldwin, and they said, I guess when you look at the state legislature, there is no verbiage or there's nothing in the legislation that can allow for a police officer to legally be indicted or convicted. So half the time when they go to court, I heard the AG Daniels when he said, under the letter of the law, this is the most that we could do because there is no legislation that allows for us to hold them in criminal contempt or something to that effect. So in a case like that, how do we go about checking to ensure that the Massachusetts state legislature, and I know you worked for a number of people up in Boston, how do we go about ensuring that that language is there, and then with Dr. Baldwin, once it's there, how can the court ensure that we're honoring the letter of the law? So I'll start with you, Ryan.
Absolutely. And so what we have to look at is what's on the books today.
Okay.
And then what needs to be changed. And so while I'm not sure what they mean that they can't be held accountable, but there are certain indemnifications that police officers have when they are doing their job. And that's when we talk about qualified immunity, right? And so they are immune of certain things because they are doing their job. And when we talk about getting rid of qualified immunity, means that they can't act reckless and still be immune from their recklessness. And police officers should be held accountable when they're being reckless, when they're being outside of their training, when sure they got shot at, but how many times do you have to return fire, and are you returning fire wantonly, like as they say they say they're doing in Kentucky. Now, with that said, in Massachusetts, we do have some police reform that's on the table. We have what's called in the conference committee. The House has their version, the Senate has their version. There's going to be differences between the House and the Senate, and they try to figure out those differences. But what we need to do as advocates is figure out those intricacies and those specific little things, that can be abused by the justice system that's inequitable. The justice system that's, again, not going to. So we have something great on the books. We think it's great on the books, but it's not going to be applied the same way as it is in Agawam, as it is in Holyoke. We have to make sure that those folks and those laws are, those laws are applied fairly.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Dr. Baldwin.
Yeah, I agree totally with Mr. McCullough that the laws that are put on the book are not applied equally. But another part of this conversation is that we as a public have to be informed about what the law is, because a lot of times the court doesn't live in context, if you understand what I mean. They're not, when they're deciding cases in a vacuum. They're not always considering what's going on out in the public with regard to what's happening to Black people. It's rare that they mention context with regard to what's going on. So a lot of times when the court is making a decision, we as a community, because we know the context, but we don't know the law,
right?
Then we get upset about what's happening. But the court works within the law. I'm not saying that it's a good thing. I'm just saying that's actually what happened. So I give you the example. The case where it just went out of my head, where the officer was indicted for third-degree manslaughter, and everybody was upset that they didn't get first-degree murder. But when you look at the language of the law wouldn't have supported that charge based upon the facts. I'm not saying in this particular case we shouldn't be surprised. I agree totally with what Joy said on the video clip with regard to her summation of what we can conclude about the decision of the court. But if you're looking at what the law actually says, then sometimes there's really nothing that we can do without changing the language of the law. Because the court doesn't look in context, and it doesn't look at what's going on to apply the law fully.
Now, who would be responsible for changing the law to ensure that can happen?
Well, the legislative body is in charge of changing the law. What the courts do is interpret. That's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to only interpret the law, not to make law. So when the times at which they do make law, is when they're interpreting something that has already been put in play, or they're determining whether or not something is constitutional or not. But it's not the court's job to make the law. It's the legislative body.
All right. Now, when it comes down to laws like that, I know people tend to look at Congress. If I'm not, Brian, correct me if I'm misunderstood or saying anything, Dr. Baldwin. Congress, they have limitations in terms of what they can do. If I'm not mistaken, they tend to leave law enforcement in terms to leave law enforcement to state legislative bodies. Am I correct or incorrect in that assumption? Would I be looking at my state body, or should I go in this instance, should I contact Congressman Neal or someone? Oh, I think you muted, Ryan.
Sorry.
Yep.
So yes, to a degree. So yes. So state legislatures are by and large in charge of how their police. Right. There are federal laws, right? And so that's why you will see, for example, the Department of Justice come in and talk about how the city of Springfield has been operating as far as the narcotics units.
Absolutely.
So there are still violations. There are still violations of federal law that the police can do, or police can violate. But when it comes down to certain things, there are certain laws that police have to operate under, mainly, like you said, under state law. And so I think what you're getting at is that while we want to change things systematically at a federal level, we might be better looking at how we change things systematically at the state level.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's correct, because a lot of times the federal government will defer to the state courts. You'll see a lot of the cases where when the police officers were indicted but found not guilty, and then the federal system declined to pursue charges. So I think you're right. We do have to start at the state level, and the state level has to be aggressive in prosecuting police officers that engage in misconduct.
Okay. So Kevin, Hanif, Minnie, Mark, you're also a guest. Is there anything you want to chime in and say, Minnie? Okay. Donna, you got it?
I understand that I'm here at the capacity of a student and a learner, someone who's not an expert, and I just have two questions. The Dr. Baldwin stated that the courts interpret the law but don't necessarily take into account context. So my question is, so courts don't interpret law according to the mitigating circumstances surrounding a case? That would be my first question. And two, how can we, the people, the laymen, help promote or influence legislation in our favor?
So as to your first question, what I meant by that is, by example, there's a case, Terry versus Ohio, and that was decided in the 1960s. And during the 1960s, of course, that's in the middle of the civil rights, where police officers are harassing Black people at that time. And the court decided in that particular case that it was okay for police officers to stop individuals based on less than probable cause. And that was the first time the court had actually said that that was okay. But the court recognized, we understand what's going on in the community, but it's not for the court to correct that. And even if we did decide that this didn't happen, or police officers couldn't do that, it wouldn't stop what's going on. So that's kind of what I meant by the court doesn't take into context. And I'm not sure if the second question is for me or more for Mr. McCullough.
Yeah, I mean, on the second question, is as far as influencing legislation, we're set up so that we can do that, and we have been doing that. And it's all about advocating, and it's all about figuring out what we want the legislation to say, or where we want the law to go. And we can get to our state reps, we can get to our state senators. There's the police reform bill that's in conference committee in Massachusetts now, that is a culmination of people pushing forward certain ideals and things they want to have happen. So we do have influence. A lot of it's about organizing. A lot of it's about being the squeaky wheel. The squeaky wheel does get the grease. It's a overused saying, but at the legislative level, that's what happens. Sometimes you're up against big forces. Sometimes you're up against people and organizations that know how to influence the legislature. So the police unions or other folks who want to make sure that they have more leeway in doing what they do, sometimes have those relationships and the resources to influence things more than us. But we're there, and I think there's a lot of resources out there for us to plug into and get in touch with our legislature.
Yeah. And a lot of this comes up, I'm gonna get right to your Hanif, and just a lot of this comes up because, again, since 1917, when they organized the first mass protest, we've been marching. And I look at the city of Springfield, we get tons of phone calls from our residents regarding the mayor, our police commissioner. But if things don't seem to move forward, it tends to stop right there at the local police department or the local city hall. And I think we've reached a point where folks need to take this a step further, and we really need to target our efforts so that we can really create that change, so we can hold police officers accountable for their behavior. So Ryan, if I approach, say, State Rep Angelo Pupolo or Bud Williams, what would my conversation look like? And I'm asking this for the folks who are viewing, for the young activists who are out there who are asking the question, what next? How do we do this? What's my first step in lobbying or advocating for legislative change?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And so Carlos Gonzalez, State Rep Carlos Gonzalez, is one of the actual leaders in the state, in the entire Commonwealth, as the chairman of the Black and Latino caucus at the state level, the Black and Latino Legislative Caucus, on police reform. And so when you're talking to your state rep, if it's Angelo Pupolo, Carlos Gonzalez, Jose Tosado, which will soon be Orlando Ramos, what you need to do first is educate yourself and see what pieces of legislation are before the legislature that you care to influence. And if there's nothing there that you care to influence, then you're going to talk about your idea. But let's just stay on police reform. There's a bill that ends qualified immunity and does other steps to reform policing in Massachusetts that the House put forward and the Senate put forward. So let's not forget about our senators, right? So Senator Lesser, Senator Welch, soon to be Senator Adam Gomez, they're also on the Senate side. And so what you need to do is educate yourself first and foremost and make sure you're clear on your ask. And then secondly, make your ask. And if your ask is because you have a personal relationship with your state rep or your state senator, then that's over the phone or text message. However, if it's by email, then it's by email. But be clear. As somebody, I've worked for 3 different state senators and I worked for a governor. And what we did is the clear and concise asks go to that elected official if they're good elected officials. And so they'll weigh that. And so if Daryl Moss writes an email to Representative so-and-so saying, hey, I think that qualified immunity should end in Massachusetts, they're going to take that into account. And the aides and the people who work for them, the staff, they keep a tally of that stuff. So you have to organize and ask specifically what you want.
Okay, thank you. And Mark, I know you had your hand up to speak a few minutes ago, so we're going to get you on. Welcome. You're muted. You have to unmute, brother. Okay.
But now, okay. Now
Yep.
I was seeing from my understanding, I'm not too like a legal student or any legal degrees, but from my understanding, are the states kind of like their own governments? They operate with their own like control, outside of federal control. Is that how it works?
Yes. Oh.
No, not exactly. They do have.
No. I was saying good
somebody
question.
off? So states have sovereignty to create their own laws, but if a state law conflicts with a federal law, there's something called the supremacy clause, and the federal law will preempt it. So by example, we have 2 different laws with marijuana. Marijuana is illegal federally. So technically they could come to Massachusetts and get all the weed smokers, but it's legal in states.
Why?
So that would be a preemptive kind of a thing. So states do have sovereignty, but federal laws preempt them.
Okay, so the state law is its own thing, but it doesn't supersede the federal law.
No.
So I guess what I would say as maybe a bit to help the situation a little bit, outside of having another conversation, would be maybe to look at each state's law enforcement protocols, the way that the law enforcement officers are actually being trained in their schools, wherever they're being trained at, and what's being allowed for them to do. What's the protocol when they go out into the field? Because I understand, like where I was born in Florida, they have different protocols for law enforcement, just like Atlanta, just like Springfield, so when they're getting trained, are they telling them to discharge the weapon all the way? Are they telling them to empty the clip till the threat is annihilated or neutralized? Are they telling them to, what are they being trained to do? And then what is the protocol once they get into the field? I feel like if we look at the protocol and like on a state by state basis, since I guess it can't be federally, we couldn't do, I don't know if we could do a national law enforcement protocol, because all you really have to do is just say, in this circumstance, you cannot discharge your weapon or something. I don't know, I guess. But if it's state to state, maybe examine our law enforcement protocols, like where they graduate from their school, there's their what's allowed for them to do once they get into the field and stuff like that. That would be kind of like the only tidbit I kind of could feel. I feel like because when they get trained, they come out and they're allowed to do certain things, like the protocol, the SOP, the standard operating procedure, like for a restaurant or something. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, is the standard operating procedure to allow murder, or you know what I mean? Like like Amadou Diallo in New York, they discharged the gun like what 41 times, and he was on the doorstep. You know, I don't remember the specific details, but I'm just saying, in a lot of these cases, they're discharging the weapon all the way. So is that the way they're being trained, and is that being, you know, maybe that needs to be taken a look at, the protocol, SOP.
I think to that point, there are federal standards sometimes. So the doctor's right. Like, you know, federal law will supersede state law, but there are many things that federal law is silent on. And when the federal law is silent on something, then it goes to the state law. And so when you talk about standard operating procedure for law enforcement, as far as a threat, what they deem to be a threat, it might be different state to state.
Yeah.
If that state attorney general or that district attorney has to apply the law, the highest to agree to the degree there is, which might be state law, as far as maybe they did, I don't want to say overshoot, but they abused their privilege as far as putting down a threat.
No, yeah.
So,
no, I was saying maybe because they haven't been, you know, maybe nobody examined it, maybe nobody looked at specifically that thing, you know, exactly. You know, I know we're saying it's different state to state, but what I'm saying is, you know, they're looking at it after the fact. They're saying, okay, you went in the field, this event happened, you discharged your weapon. Now, were you within your boundaries to do that? That's like after the fact. I'm saying, like, maybe before you get out of school, we should let you know that you can't do this. You see what I'm saying? Like, so that way we go in the field, you know?
Let me interrupt for a second. I think.
I'm sorry.
Well, as we try and figure this out and get all the information, this is all about information gathering, and you're asking really good questions, which kind of is going to prompt me to invite some law enforcement folks onto the show. So I think I did an interview last week with Cheryl Claprood on Focus Springfield, and I asked a similar question in regards to different types of training that the police officers undergo during the academy and then during their professional development sessions. For the city of Springfield, for instance, their curriculum, their status, all the trainings are developed and how can I say, trainings are developed by on the state level. So she can't even say, I want to make sure that we have diversity training for Springfield officers. She has to wait to see how they modify their training and operational standards. You understand where I'm coming from? So in order to do it, what I would like to do on this show, Hanif, Minnie, Kevin, is invite the commissioner on at some point. I think law enforcement should be responsible for answering law enforcement questions. Does that make sense? Yeah. And I think as we move forward in terms of, for the folks who are trying to figure out where do we go next to ensure that our lives matter, I think we definitely need a better understanding, which is why we brought Ryan and Bridget on. We need an understanding of how the legislative process works, as well as the judicial system, because it's hard to attack something. You know, how do you fight a monster? You don't know how that monster lives. You don't know where the weak spots are. You don't know what you have to go after. And I think right now we have to figure out what we're fighting, who we're fighting, and how to fight against it in order to bring about positive social change. So Ryan, I'm gonna come back to you for a second. Now, can a citizen, and I think we can, I looked it up last, can we, if suppose we have an organizing entity here in the city of Springfield, could we create our own bill?
Absolutely.
In regards to law enforcement?
Absolutely. So Massachusetts is one of the states where you actually, it's by right, as a citizen of Massachusetts, your state representative has to file a bill for you. Now, sometimes state reps they don't get in trouble for it, but they can be not held accountable either. But so if I want to file a bill that says you can't wear a yellow shirt on Sunday, technically, if I do everything correctly and I give it to my state rep, who's Brian Ash, he has to file that bill. Now, that bill won't go anywhere. It won't get a hearing. Not wearing a yellow shirt on Sunday is probably unconstitutional, but we can do things. And so they call it by citizen's petition. So by a citizen's petition, you can file a bill. Now, if we had an organization or an entity, or there's already an established organization or entity, let's just say out of the blue, the NAACP is Springfield. The Springfield NAACP wants to file a bill about police conduct, they can. And that bill is supposed to have a certain process by law, by Massachusetts Constitution throughout. And that's a lot of times how law starts
Right.
in Massachusetts. So when I worked for the 3 state senators I did, whether it was advocates, whether it was organizations, they would bring language to us to say, hey, I think this needs to be changed, or hey, I think this law needs to be this idea needs to become law. And then we would take it and we would probably change it up a little bit to make sure it fits within the legislative process. But that's how law starts, and that's how things change.
All right. Help me to understand this. It says create your own bill. A, the idea. B, the petition. 3 goes to committee. 4 goes on the floor for debate. 5, enactment, and then law. Am I correct?
Yeah, but I mean, it doesn't have to follow that process in the sense.
Okay.
I can throw what they call a thing called a study committee. So let's just take my terrible example of no wearing yellow on Sunday. It's a terrible example. Nothing's ever going to happen. I can put it in study committee forever.
Right.
And so every year you're going to ask me, hey, Representative McCollum, what's up with my no yellow on Sunday bill? And I'm going to say, oh, it's in study committee. Or if I really want to throw it out, I can say it's been deemed unconstitutional and it's not a valid law.
Okay.
But after it has a hearing, every bill needs to have a hearing, a public hearing. It can go to the floor. They do debate. They will vote on it. If the House and the Senate have different ideas about it, it goes to a conference committee between senators and reps, and then they iron out the differences. It will go to the governor, and the governor can either sign it or not sign it.
Okay. All right. So for all of our viewers, if you're watching that, you heard that straight from Ryan McCullum. And if anybody knows, he knows. And as we talk about that question, to vote or not to vote, as we throw these questions out here, I need you to listen clearly to the responses. If your current legislators don't support some of the modifications, changes, or suggestions that you're making, then you know who to vote for and who not to vote for. People tend to vote their interest. So you'll find yourself a candidate, a viable candidate, who may be willing to take that bill to the next level and push for it and fight for it. Not saying that you'll be effective, but if you're worried about whether or not you should vote or not, based on people actually representing your interest, you need to know exactly where you would start. So I'm open the floor. Hanif, Minnie, anything?
Yeah, I got a couple of things. One thing that I want to say, and I know you talking about law enforcement. One thing I do want to say to what Mark said about examining their SOP before they do. In the Eric Garner case, that chokehold that was used to kill him was already banned by their SOP. So similar to what was being said before, the application of their SOP is not fair and equal to people. And I think you're going to find that when we delve further into a law enforcement conversation at some point another day, like we're talking about legislatively. So my other question, specific to Ryan right now, is, in the media we don't really hear about it unless it's a scandal too much. But when we do hear about it, we hear about the impact of lobbyists at the federal level. From your experience, how active do you see lobbyists at the state level? And for those who do not know what a lobbyist is, what is a lobbyist?
Sure. So I'm a lobbyist, right? So I'm a registered lobbyist. I have clients that pay me to influence legislation and regulations. Because the other thing, when we keep talking about legislation, the legislature puts forward what they would love, the spirit of what they would like to have happen. It's technically the executive branch, whether it's so it would be maybe the Executive Office of Public Safety. A lot of times the legislature is directing executive branch to do certain things. And then when the executive branch is directed to do certain things, they promulgate regulations. And so as lobbyists, you are trying to influence legislation. And then when that legislation passes, you're in touch with the executive branch to make sure to promulgate regulations that are in the spirit of the legislation. Now, that sounded like a lot of, mumbo jumbo, but what used to happen when I worked in the legislature, I worked in the state Senate, and Mitt Romney was our governor. And so the Democratic left-leaning legislature would pass laws, and they would direct the executive branch, which Mitt Romney, who was a conservative, was under, or who he controlled. He would promulgate regulations that kind of didn't do what we asked them to do. And so the legislature in there, and being smart, they had something called regulatory oversight. They created regulatory oversight to bring them in and say, hey, we passed this law to say this, and you did this, which had nothing to do with what we wanted to do. And so what lobbyists are doing are they're influencing the legislation, and they're making sure that the regulations, the things that happen in practice actually happen. And so lobbyists are very active at the state level, to answer your first question. And lobbyists, it's become a dirty word because everybody thinks of big money lobbyists and tobacco lobbyists and firearms lobbyists and all this stuff. But there's what we call advocates who are still lobbyists, who are advocating for things that we care about as Black folks, right? And so the NAACP or the ACLU or whatever nonprofit you might be thinking about who's in touch with their legislature trying to make change that we care about, there's certain laws about how long, if they spend 15 hours in touch with legislators, then they have to register as a lobbyist. And so it's a long answer, but lobbyists are active, and there are lobbyists who are lobbying on our behalf to change things the right way. And they need help as well because they're not as well paid as some of the others.
Okay, thank you. We have a question. Bridget, understanding the legal language and judicial issues in the Breonna Taylor ruling, how important is it for the public to understand the legal underpinnings of the case?
Well, it's very important for the public to understand the law in general. And in the Breonna Taylor case, actually is no different than any of the other cases if you really look at them. Usually officers might get indicted, but they're acquitted. Here, they just or they're not indicted at all. And that's exactly what happened in the Breonna Taylor case. Without actually knowing what was the testimony through the grand jury, I have no idea how an indictment for reckless endangerment as to shooting a wall would supersede an indictment as to shooting Breonna Taylor at all. So it is important. It's important to follow the law. It's important to follow the facts. It's important to look at the Supreme Court cases. The Supreme Court does a review every year of some cases that they're going to decide. And it's important to know what those cases are about because a lot of times there are criminal justice cases being decided. By example, this term, the 2019-2020 term, there was a case that I'm sure many people don't know about that finally said that in order to convict a defendant, it has to be a unanimous verdict. It wasn't always that case in every state. Some states could convict a defendant based on a 10-2 verdict. So it's very important for people to know what the law is, to know how the law impacts our community, and to follow cases that impact our community.
Okay. Now, short of getting a law degree, how would we go about doing that?
Well, I know there are, Western New England does a mini law school. That's one thing. You can come and learn about the law that way. And it's like $35 for 6 weeks. And you have legal scholars teach you about the law. I know a lot of police departments actually have citizen academies. That's another way that you can find out about it. You have to study the law to know the law. So, you can do classes. Stick has a wonderful CJ program. Western New England has a wonderful CJ program, political science, watching the news, following not just the Facebook news. You have to, watch some of the news that hurt us as well as the news that help us as well. So those would be recommendations that I would suggest with regard to and watching shows like this. This is a very informative and educational show. I think doing things like this is also very important for the community.
Okay. And then for anyone who can answer this, another question that came up during the week, what does it mean when people say defund the police? What exactly does that mean? Anyone want to take a stab at that? Or should I wait until I bring it up?
I can answer it if nobody else wants to answer it.
Oh no, if you're gonna answer it, Dr. L, I'd rather hear yours.
Okay, well, defunding the police, a lot of times people think that defunding the police means that we want to take away a police department, and that's not it. We want to invest in other sources where police officers should not be involved. So if it's a mental health issue, police officers should not be involved. We should hire people, use the funding that we normally are using for those types of issues to put it out to a different agency to handle. Or if it's a school issue, children who are in kindergarten should not be arrested. We should not have police officers in elementary school. So we should do something else, use that money for something else, and simply fund the police officers just for the protect and the serve portion of their job.
Okay, so basically the thing, redirect the funds elsewhere.
Yes.
Okay. All right, anybody else want to jump on that? Covered it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll also jump on that too.
Go for it.
I think it also, in addition to what Dr. Baldwin was saying, it also is about making sure that the funding is not only redirected away from activities that should be done, but it's redirected in the right place, and it's redirected, in the right types of organizations and interventions. You don't want a police officer responding to something that's a medical issue or a mental health issue. You want a police officer responding to those things that they're supposed to. And the biggest thing that I get from the defunding the police conversation is to really look at the common sense things we already know we should have and put funding that's been going to the police to these common sense things that we keep getting told we don't have money to fund.
Okay. All right, so for all the folks who are watching, if you want to comment, if you have another question in regards to defunding the police, please feel free to share that. Now, there are those in regards to Breonna Taylor, I won't mess her name up, who talk about her character flaws. That Breonna and others due to character flaws are responsible for their murder by the police. Thoughts on this? Should we overreact? Should we wait for facts? Should we actually assess the character and lifestyle of the individuals, or should Black folks just erupt like we tend to do when things like this happens? Anybody? And Mark, I'm gonna call you out on this one because you had posted something about you read the 41 pages. I read that when you first posted it. The 41 pages on the investigative process. Talk about your thought. I'm just kind of curious as what you were thinking when you posted that and when you were reading that and the information you were conveying to your public.
Well, I feel like it's just my opinion too. I think that we about the legislature, but we also need to have a conversation amongst ourselves about what we're actually doing amongst ourselves, and we have to have that long night between us, too, because if you got something going for yourself as far as women that have their head on their shoulders, they might go to nursing school, law school, and then they dealing with maybe per se a knucklehead, somebody that might deal dope, sell dope, gun run, stuff like that. And, that might be their relationship, but it's a lot of times where we come into that. That's for different reasons. I'm not getting at nobody. I'm just saying that I feel like it's a conversation that we need to have outside of the legislature. There's going to be the ones that amongst us are kind of dealing with the spiritual healing. And that's the conversation we need to have too, because it's almost like personal experience. I know a few women that went to jail behind felonies, behind their boyfriends. I know quite a few brown-skinned women that have gotten in some type of trouble behind some knucklehead they're dealing with at some point in their life, whether it was a felony, whether they escaped it, whether they had the money to buy the lawyer to get them off, whether they got prosecuted or not, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, I feel like that's definitely a conversation we need to have.
Okay. So let me ask you in the context of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, there's no other group where we demonize based on character. We do not. I mean, Kyle Rittenhouse, who went out shooting people in Kenosha, Wisconsin, we didn't talk about his character flaws or the character flaw of his mother for bringing him there. So it's only with relationship to people of color do we redirect conversations about character flaws. Last I knew it, there was no law about being a liar that you could be executed for, or a law about hanging out with a drug dealer where you could be executed for, or sitting in a car having a drink where you could be executed for.
Okay, no, I get you. I hear what you're saying. I'm not talking about the law specifically, though. I'm talking about spiritually and us amongst this conversation. That's why I said you got the legislators, they're going to do the laws, and you have y'all that go to law school and do the laws. And then you got people like me that deal with the people directly all the time. You see what I'm saying? And I can tell you from experience, there's a lot of women, and this is a conversation we got to have. We're not going to have the conversation. I'm not saying we don't have to have your conversation. We need to have all the conversations because we're having a long night right now. As a people, we come into a realization of who we are and what we're doing, where we at, what we've been doing, what's going on, who's oppressing us. So a lot of these conversations are just going to come out, you know what I'm saying? But I feel like indeed it is a conversation to have with the young girls about how they carry themselves, as well as the young men. You don't want him to go to jail, but you don't want him to put himself in situations. You want to have his mind conditioned where he kind of understand where he's at and what he's dealing with so that he can be out, you know?
Mark, my closest friend did like 9 years. I have other friends who have done time, and some of them who will probably do time again. So when you talk about, compartmentalizing and saying, okay, you deal with that conversation, you deal in the streets and they don't. The bottom line is we all have family members and friends who have what I would call alternative lifestyles. So the question is, when a situation like this occurs, would that conversation be a distraction in terms of creating social equity, or should that conversation be a priority? Because I have, my friends are probably no different than the cats you deal with on a daily basis on the streets. So I think we have to still figure out how to tackle the problem, because regardless of the character flaws, regardless of who's dating who, regardless of whether or not I still hang out with cats who are still committing crimes, does that really mean that I should accept the police department kicking down my door and just firing recklessly into my home? So I think we have different conversations that tie in. Go ahead, I'm listening.
I feel like everybody hearing what I'm saying, but then hearing something else somebody said that might, you know what I mean? I'm not saying
that's why we're having the conversation. That's why we're having to clarify. We good.
100,000% have our priorities in order as far as what we're doing, but all of that is what I'm saying is all of it's coming out at the same time. It's all coming out at the same time. So it's not as if we're saying let's not talk about that. We're having a conversation. We're talking about it all. You see what I'm saying? So we're talking about how we got here. What are we dealing with? As far as a lot of I'm not saying something's wrong with what you're doing or it's that you're a bad person. Everybody's doing what they're doing. I'm just saying that's a conversation that we're still gonna have. Now, as far as priorities, yes, I'll give you that. We're talking about legislature and how we're gonna stop this from happening, then yes, we can talk about that. I feel like we're gonna keep talking.
Okay.
Until somebody makes it's like because the legislature moves kind of at a snail pace as far as the people's understanding of the civics and how they change the law and stuff is really low, right? So the people don't really understand how to change things. But at the same time, they can change themselves, is what I'm saying. They can change themselves at any time. They might not be able to change the law at no time. Not have understanding to change the law. They might not know how to talk to people. They might understand civics, but they can change themselves. They can stop themselves from being in a position. So that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying I'm saying we all having a conversation. That's all. It's all.
Can I clarify? Can I offer some clarification? I think from what I'm hearing.
Go for it.
So, character flaws is one thing, right? And that's just one thing. But what I think Mark is saying is that when you make certain choices, you subject yourself to certain consequences. And if we can empower the people to make better choices, then maybe we won't deal with these outcomes. So if I'm dealing with a D-boy and I let him stash 10 bricks in my house and my door gets kicked down and I go to jail, whether or not they, went about the process to the letter of the law, or whether or not I was unfairly targeted, I put myself in a position to have my door kicked in and to be taken into custody and face charges, is what I think Mark was saying.
And
No, I can say something.
I agree.
Hold on.
On that point,
Everybody at one time. I'm taking it. No,
Go
that's
ahead.
clearly what he was saying, and I think what he said needed to be heard, which is why I threw it out there. First rule I said was we weren't going to go into her personality and her lifestyle, but I feel that it's necessary. We examine the steps that we need to take to move forward collectively. All conversations need to be on the table in order for us to prioritize what steps we need to make first. I heard him clearly, and I thoroughly understood, and I don't disagree with him. But when we look at how the collective response is, when we look at our collective response, we still have to determine, okay, what path do we take to move this thing forward? So I'm not in disagreement with anything he said. Some things need to be stated and put on the table.
Well, here's the thing,
okay?
too. I agree. Here's the thing, too, is that
Who's
white,
talking?
For a second. So there are white women who have ex-boyfriends who are white drug dealers who don't get murdered in their apartments as well. So to hold us to a different standard is a little, it's a little tough, right? So it was her ex-boyfriend that they were after. It wasn't her current boyfriend and her ex-boyfriend who had packages sent to her apartment. And so, yes, we have to be smart. Yes, I've been told by a couple mentors of mine, Ryan, you're black. You're going to be looked at differently. You're going to be under a microscope. Things are not going to be fair. So there's that discussion that Mark is right that we have to have about how things are unfair and we have to live differently and we have to be more careful on things. But at the same time, it's back to what I said the first time, is laws aren't no matter how much we change the law, if they're not applied equitably towards us, then there's a problem, right? And so as a white woman's not going to get her door kicked down because her ex-white boyfriend used to sell pounds and pounds of weed and get murdered in her apartment. Just doesn't happen.
Got you. Okay. Dr. Baldwin? Sean, I got it.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to comment on the behavior aspect or the characteristics. I think what's missing from the discussion is that there is no other group who, if you hold the microscope under one identified area, then of course you're going to find stuff. But if you don't, like in where Mr. McCullough lived in Longmeadow, I'm sure there's drugs in Longmeadow, but there's no microscope there. There's no prevailing surveillance there. And so when you use behavior or characteristics or who I hang out with as a justification for either following me, arresting me, convicting me, that's an inequality that shouldn't exist in the criminal justice system. No other group but white people can storm the state house in Michigan with guns and without a mask and in front of police officers and live. Black people can't even sit in a car and get high and live. And so I think that, sure, we should have the conversation about who I'm hanging out with, but the fact that I'm hanging out with someone should not be a viable stance to convict me, to search my house. We still have a standard of law that should be applied equally when we know it's not in our community. And so I'm not speaking directly to anybody. I'm speaking about how I feel about judging based upon character. I think only people of color are judged upon character. They're always saying stuff like, well, if they would have conformed or if they would have just put their hands up. Well, Philando Castile had his hands up. He kept telling the officer, look, I got a legal weapon. We had the social worker who was shot on the ground with his hands up. We have people shot in the back. We have people who are complying, who don't have bad character. And we're just held to a double standard in this two system of criminal justice.
Okay. Next, I got Hanif, then Kevin, and then Mark. I'll get to you. Go ahead, Hanif.
Part of what I wanted to say was what Dr. Baldwin was saying. The other thing is when people make those kind of assertions and statements, it's like if you're going to judge, her character on limited information that you know, but you won't judge your president's character on a lot of information you know. You won't judge the character of the officers who stormed in there based off of the information that comes out that you know. You won't storm, the DA's character who's already told you, I'm not going to prosecute this person, and then no, you can't do that. if you're not going to judge everyone's character in the mix with the same kind of fervor you want to judge the person you want to demonize, then no. The character flaw can't, whatever character flaw that you perceive, can't be taken into account if you're going to try to do something like that, because it's not a fair standard. Now, we all know that there's not going to be a fair standard here. We all know there's never been a fair standard here for people of color, for Black people especially. We know that. But for that particular question, if that's what we're going to say about, Breonna Taylor's character because of her ex-boyfriend who doesn't live there, who is an ex, and she hasn't associated with, then how about these 3 police officers? What about their character? What about the police chief's character that hired them? What about the trainer's character that said that they were fit for office? What about the governor's character that said, hey, this area is all good with what they're doing? What about the mayor's character that appointed, that the structure that's in that police department? So my thing is, we can't sit here and play the character flaw game if we're not going to judge everyone's character flaw like the one we want to demonize.
Right. Okay. And next up was Kevin. Kevin, before you go, let me just say this. When I say character flaw, sorry, Kev, I got to be really clear. Those are my words and not Mark. So, and he's not the only. There's quite a few who talked about Breonna Taylor's background. So those are my words. I want to make sure that's really clear for everyone. Kevin, you're up and you're muted.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I sat silently trying to hear, and internet issues. I'm off to a slow start as usual. I would like to say that, yeah, I think that a lot of the marching and the protesting needs to be redirected and more pointed in areas where we're going to be more effective and bring about greater change. But I also think that the main thing that needs to be done is that the laws that exist and the rules that exist on the books right now, if we learned how to utilize those laws and have them simply enforce the existing laws, we would see a different quality of life for our people. Because you have to understand, I've done some union representation and things of that nature, and when I would speak to our people, and when I speak to young people now that are going into jobs and going into these careers, I tell them, familiarize yourself with the rules and regulations. Learn what is allowed and what's not allowed. See, because what white people do, first of all, this is their system, it's not our system. We know that. And what they do is every rule that exists, every law that exists is in place to protect white people. Every law, even murder laws. They came up with first and second degree and manslaughter and even third degree. That's to protect white people, because for us, it's murder. It's always, if a black man kills a black man, it's murder. They don't even care what the circumstances are or what the context is behind them killing. For us, it's murder. For them, it's like depending on how much money you have and what good boy circle you're in. They made a law to protect them. So we have to learn to use those laws to protect us, I believe. Okay, Breonna Taylor was wrongly shot, wrongly killed. That's true. But most times with us, when we get into when we're being shot, when we're being tased, the police have already broken the law. Grand juries will not indict them for murder and all that because of this immunity stuff. But in most instances with these black people, the law has been broken in the contact with the police. Most of the police are coming into contact with us illegally. They need to have a reason on the books to stop me and ask me where I'm going and why I'm going and so on. This is America. I can walk where I want. I can wear my hat the way I want. I can do all the same things that the white boys can do. And every rule and every law that's on the book that was designed to help them, as I tell young people when they go into the jobs, the minute they commit something to paper, they think they're protecting themselves. But those same words are the words we need to use to convict them. So if we're not going to get them for shooting Breonna Taylor, we need to look at the violation of her civil rights and the violation of her rights as a human being to have her door kicked in for a minor crime, you know, or some minor warrant. You know, they already violated her civil rights when they made contact with her, you know. And so we need to be more diligent in pursuing law enforcement for that. Get them on the technicalities, okay? Then maybe that won't fall under the immunity, perhaps. I don't know the law. uh, 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 the JD professor can always bring clarity to that. But I just believe, first of all, most of the time we're having illegal contact with the police. And I mean, Matt, I've had so much illegal contact with the police for simply being black, pulling me over, wanting to know where I'm going, why I'm in this neighborhood, whose car I'm driving. What do you mean, whose car I'm driving? You know, there's a license and registration with my name on it, but you really have no reason to ask me for the license and registration because you should have never stopped me. And then they're hoping that something gets out of hand, and then it leads to these confrontations, so on and so forth. But I do believe we need to. I think that if we simply had them enforce the existing laws, and as I've heard others say today, in an equitable manner. You know, they're not stopping white boys and frisking them, not unless they look a certain way, you know, or unless they're in a certain neighborhood. But like, listen, I told a state trooper one time, and I'll be done. I got stopped by a state trooper. I was so close to my house, I could look at my house. I could look at my front door. I was just about to turn onto my street, and I pulled over for him. He had his lights on. This guy stops me, and I asked him, "Why you stopping me, sir?" He tells me, "Well, I was looking suspicious." Okay, listen, I'm not as fortunate as Ryan. I don't live in East Longmeadow or Longmeadow. I live in the city. Okay, where I was at was not suspicious because there's plenty of black people that live where I live. So now I'm being stopped by this trooper, and this car drives by, a very old, raggedy looking car with a scraggly looking white girl in it with stringy hair and a young black male in the front seat. And they drive by. And it's obvious that's a transaction going on, right? I tell the state trooper, "You're stopping me coming from work, and that's a suspicious vehicle. What is this white girl doing in this neighborhood with a young black male in the seat?" Now, I don't know what they were doing, but they looked more suspicious than I looked. So there was no equity in how his suspicion discretion was being distributed, because if there was, he would have stopped talking to me and gone and pursued them and pulled them over. When I told him that, even he had to laugh. He was like, "Well, yeah, that does look kind of out of place." I said, "Yeah, it really does." I said, "And that's my house over there. I was almost home, you know." But anyways, though, we just need to, I don't think we need to stop marching. I don't think we need to stop protesting. I just think we need to protest more pointedly. You know, if we want laws changed, well, let's protest the DA. Let's make the DA be more accountable. You know,
Right.
to
That,
pursue greater pursuit of crooked cops. Because marching in front of City Hall, that's not going to get it done. But the DA, who is the chief law officer in the county, if he was more aggressive, perhaps, and I'm not saying he's not, I don't know what his record is, but if we had more aggressive DAs because they were tired of us standing in front of their building and harassing them, then maybe they might pursue these police who don't police themselves. So I'm sure there's a lot more I could have said, but I'm going to share the space. But I was quiet for a long time, so I got to speak for a little longer. Thank you.
oh man. Okay, next up, Mark, you've been patient as well. You're back. You're muted. You have to unmute.
Me? Is that me? Okay. All right. There we go. No. I was taking that in. That was a great point. Some great points. No, I was saying, as far as the character flaw thing, I think I didn't even say character flaw first of all, but I just want everybody to understand that I wouldn't say it's one or the other. That's the point I was trying to make. It's not one conversation or other. One talking to my son about how he's going to handle himself is not me going in public and saying that she should be killed because she was dealing with a drug dealer. I'm just saying it's different conversations we're having in different places. Like I have a son, so I have to talk to him when things happen. I have to explain things to him. So the way I explain it to him is, this is what happened. This is what can happen if this happens. You see what I'm saying? When in public, we're talking about the law and changing it because no one should be murdered unwantedly. No one should be killed. I don't want anybody to confuse what I'm saying. If anybody fights for so-called black or brown-skinned people, more, we all fight, right? But I live the fight too, so I understand. I might not be in the legislature, might not be in Senate, but I fight amongst the people that I live with, amongst my brothers, sisters, loved ones, and community. You see what I'm saying? So no one should be killed. No one should be murdered unjustly. All of us that have got murdered, the blood is definitely on someone's hands. And I'm saying it's a conversation we're having in different places. That's all. We do need to talk to our daughters about dealing with drug dealers. So I don't care what nobody's going to say. Like, I know that we still have to talk to our daughters about dating drug dealers, but in public, we still have to talk about the legislatures and the laws and stopping the police from killing black people for no reason. You see what I'm saying? I just think it's just different places, different conversation, different place, but it's still all conversation. That's all. It's not one or the other. It's one and the other. It's not either or. It's actually both. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, we got you, 100%. Dr. Baldwin?
Yeah, I just wanted to address some things that Mr. Dempsey had stated about like civil rights and things like that. A lot of times, civil rights actions, at least federal, that's civil. So all you get is money. You don't get, and a lot of, I think in the Breonna Taylor case, she got $12 million. And a lot of but sometimes we want justice. We want justice sometimes. And then you're absolutely right. Police officers don't have the right to just stop you for anything, but they do. Meaning, when I say this, is that if they have, there's two levels upon which they can stop you, right? And I'm trying not to be so technical, but one is reasonable suspicion that they think you might be doing something, and so they can stop you. Anything less than that, they can stop you, but you can walk away. Now that's theory, but in reality, we know as Black people that we can't just walk away. But police officers technically are allowed to walk up to you and ask you your name and ask you why you got your hat on that way, but you are allowed to walk away unless they have either reasonable suspicion or probable cause.
Okay. All right. Go ahead. Kev, you were saying something?
Well, yeah, I was just thanking the doctor for clarity, and yeah, and I do understand that in civil matters that it's usually a monetary reward, and she made a statement that sometimes we want justice. I want justice all the time, even if it costs me my civil rights money. I will pass on money for justice, me personally. And I know it's easier said than done. Some people may say, oh man, he's just talking. Well, they don't know me. They don't know me that well. But I would always much rather have justice, and I would hope that we would have justice. And when I heard that they awarded $12 million to her family, I was happy for them, but I was also hoping that wasn't going to serve as hush money for them, and that they wouldn't simply let this disappear now. And then we had what happened. It came afterwards, but I'm still hoping that they continue to pursue it as a family, just for the sake of justice.
Okay.
I don't know if it's done. Perhaps Dr. Baldwin can give us clarity on what can be done now that has gone to the grand jury. Is there any other way to pursue these officers other than just civilly, where we can? Yes.
Before she answers that question, I have Minnie Jones. She was waiting to go up next. So
I'm sorry. Yeah,
sorry. Well, hold that question, because that's a good one. Minnie, you're up.
Oh, I'm so proud of you, D. Moss. Thank you so much. So I just want to provide a little context before I pose my own question. And to my understanding, police officers' original purpose was to keep people from being separated from their property. And prior to all this legislation, people could duel. You know what I mean? Like, you know how you have those Westerns where you could walk into the saloon and call them out and challenge them to a duel, and y'all turn y'all back to each other, walk 10 paces, turn around and shoot. And then somebody would come take away the body, and nobody was punished. So I think that, this system of things was primarily established for our subjugation and oppression. Starting with the black codes and to keep us in line after we were emancipated. So my question is, and I'm totally asking for myself, can we really change a system whose primary role was that of our oppression? Like, can we really change the system from inside out? Because I struggle with that. And I also want to talk about, what after marching and protest? A lot of people just protest and that's it. We scream no justice, no peace, but there's no justice and then there's still peace. So how far do we think that we're gonna get issuing idle threats and letting protests and marches be the end all be all, because it's just the first step in liberation?
I guess I'll go, and then maybe the doctor, or whomever else. So to your first question, that's a huge question, and that's a question that's going on right now is reimagining the police force. And what are police for? And our police in certain areas are there to do certain things and over police black and brown and poor bodies, and then they're supposed to just respond in other areas to need, right? And so I keep going back to Longmeadow, and like Kevin said, I'm fortunate enough to live in Longmeadow. And I'll be frank, if I need something and I have to call the cops, I'm gonna make sure I tell that dispatcher I'm black, right? So if I think somebody's breaking into my house in Longmeadow, I'm gonna tell that dispatcher, but by the way, I'm the homeowner and I'm black. And make sure you tell that officer that, because I don't want the officer coming into my house thinking I'm the person who's perpetrating the crime. With that said, the cops that are here in Longmeadow are not over policing us. They're here just to respond to our issues. And the police in Springfield or Holyoke or Lawrence or Lowell, in some of the places in Massachusetts, are there to actually exert their force rather than respond to issues. And so you're right. We need to reimagine why police are police, especially in those areas. And so I'm okay with my police here in Longmeadow, despite the fact that they might confuse me with a perpetrator. I like the way my police force is. Would somebody like that in Springfield or Lowell? Yes. So we need to reimagine what the police are doing. And to your last point, like, what are we to do after the marching, after the protesting? The other thing, like, I bought a new face mask and there's one word on it. It says vote. Like, people got to vote. And we've been saying it months and months, and people have to vote and they have to know who they're voting for. And it has to happen on every level. Donald Trump is terrible. I'll say that. He's terrible. He needs to get the F out. But there are also terrible local officials that I won't name personally, but they need to leave too. And we need to know who they are, and we need to vote properly, because sometimes those local people have to actually, they have more impact on our lives as citizens than Donald Trump does. So that's what we do after we march and we protest.
Thank you, Ryan. Dr. Baldwin?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what am I answering Minnie or Mr. Dumpson question? Miss Jones?
We're Minnie right now, then we'll go to Mr. Dumpson.
Okay, I think that, you're right. If we look at how change happens slowly. I believe like police officers were actually started to catch runaway slaves. Actually, I think that's how the police department actually started. So it was a system created specifically to control Black bodies. And I think, though, gradually, if we keep fighting and we keep pushing for change and we keep having these conversations, although it happens slow, it happens. I mean, who would have ever thought that we would have had a Black president or a South Asian and Jamaican potential vice president, and a woman at that? So I think, progress happens slowly. And right now, it's about continuing to put it out there, letting voices be heard, letting things be seen, and allyship in some uncommon places. I hope I answered you.
Okay, thank you. So, Kev, I know you had a question for Dr. Dr. Baldwin earlier. I'm giving you the doctor status now, Kev. I know you're muted. You have to unmute, brother. So
Yes,
I know
sir.
you had a question for
Okay.
Dr. Baldwin earlier. You want to pose that question now?
Yes, I would. Thank you very much. And thank you for allowing me to bypass the matriculation to become a doctor. And I greatly appreciate that. Could you please reflect that in my payments
I
from
shall.
now on? But yeah, Dr. Baldwin, my question with the grand jury failing to indict, is there further recourse available to the family in seeking uh, 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 penal justice, where we can perhaps get these penal. Wait, don't play with me. So, where we could get these individuals charged with crimes and facing possible incarceration, which is what they deserve. Because if it had been anyone else under any other circumstance, they would not have been released like that. So, my question to the doctor is there further recourse that the family has in pursuit of their justice for the loss of their daughter's life, who they will never get back?
Well, I didn't, without seeing like the terms of the civil agreement, I'm going to assume that part of that agreement is that they can't sue individually the police officers involved. So I'm going to think that that is not a recourse. When it comes to criminal charges, the federal system, AG Daniel Cameron, he's declined to prosecute the other two officers, and this is what he came up with the remaining officer. I don't know if the state has declined to issue charges at all, but that would be the only, if possible, the only other recourse would be if the state decided to pursue charges, because the federal system has already, or the AG's office has said, this is as much as we're going to do for you.
Wow.
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you.
All right. Hanif, you've been kind of quiet. Anything?
I think about some of the things that are being said, and especially when we talk about change, there's things that I think about when we talk about change being the slow process. Change is slow when you're not the one in power. And it becomes a generational thing. But you look at the ones that are in power, when they want change, happens just like that. I mean, look at, not to bring politics in, let's look at one of the big political hot button topics right now, nominating a new Supreme Court justice. Well, 4 years ago, with a lot more time, they were told we need to wait for the next president. But now that the Republicans are in power, 4 years later, nope, we're going to nominate it right now. So change is a thing that, like, when you're in power, it happens all the time. So the question that I would have is, how do we, whether it's within the existing system or whether it's outside of it, and this question is really for anyone, but I really want to point it to both Dr. Baldwin and Ryan, how do we, who are not lawyers, who are not legislators, who are not lobbyists, gain the kind of power necessary to be able to influence the change that we want at a more rapid pace? I mean, Dr. Claude Anderson talks about powernomics all the time and, being able to do so with our money. But my question would be to the two of you, how do we, outside the system, gain that kind of leverage so that change can happen on a more rapid
level? I said it earlier, and it sounded simple, and it is a little simple, but I'll take it to the next level. Is we have to vote, but people have to run for office too, right? So we need people to vote for, and so we need more people who agree with us, who are Black, who are brown, who are poor, who are women, who are LGBTQ, who who actually live the lives that we live to actually run for office, so we have some options to vote for. Because we had a very important election, and I'll be specific. We had a very important election for our next U.S. senator, and on the Democratic side, we had two very, very, very privileged white males running, and then it was about who's going to be better for us as people of color, and I went with a Kennedy who is more privileged than any other white male in the country, but he actually spoke to our needs as Black people. But if we had a person of color running, then maybe it'd be a different situation altogether. Like when I worked for Deval Patrick was running. Now we had an option. So not only do we need them to run at that level, but people don't get to that level just overnight. And so when people are running for local office, we need more people of color running for local office. So the voting's one thing, and then having options to vote for them. And then also, furthermore to your question, Hanif, is to get involved. There are a lot of local organizations fighting for justice, whether it's racial justice, social justice, all types of stuff. And we can get involved with those folks. We can give them money. We can volunteer. We can help. And they help move the ball forward as well. So that's what folks can do from the outside to influence the power dynamic, because that's what it really comes down to, is a power dynamic. And we don't have the power, right? We don't have the power right now. And that's why Trump's able to do what he does, right? And we have to hold our elected officials accountable for being because you know what Republicans do well and conservatives do well is they hold their elected officials accountable. And if they don't do what they think they should do, they vote them out. Sometimes Democrats, we give the other Democrats passes and we give liberals passes and say, well, they have a tough district, so they have to vote that way, so let's vote them back. No, like, you're gone. We need somebody else there. And that started to happen with like AOC and some of the far left people who are primarying some of the folks who've been there for a while. But we need to hold folks accountable who are elected to office as well.
I'm going to agree with Mr. McCullough, but I still feel like that is still slow change. I'm going to refer you to Derek Bell, who was a scholar, legal scholar, and he theorized that, racism is just inevitable. And the only way that we get civil rights victories is if our interests converges with those of white people. So when our interests converges with white people, that's when we can move faster. But until that happens, then I still think that progress will be slow.
I feel that 100%.
Okay. All right. And Minnie, okay. It looks like you didn't agree with something. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
I don't disagree with everyone is saying, and it sounds great in theory. It sounds wonderful, but I'm sorry, we're gonna be here another 100 years if we do it that way. Another 400 years. These people have never respected a humble hand, ever. Only the iron fist. Until we slam down the iron fist, we're going to be where we are for the next 500 years at least, maybe even longer. The window for us to make a change in our favor is closing. Every day, they've never respected the humble hand, ever, ever, ever. Only the iron fist. And that's the only way we're going to get out of it. But it sounds good. And a lot of people need that. A lot of people need that you got to have the Martins and you got to have the Malcolms, even though Martin was becoming a Malcolm, which is why he got assassinated. So it sounds great. And a lot of people, are going to gravitate toward that. A lot of people do gravitate toward it. And the more that happens, the more we're still continuing to fuel and fund our own oppression. Only the iron fist, period.
Okay. Kev, you had your hand up?
Well, I
Yes,
was
sir.
gonna say, what's the iron fist mean? Sorry, Kaz.
I have
Smash down.
The iron fist is the meet force with force.
No, but so specific. Let's have that conversation.
So I mean, I don't want to say too much. I got goals and aspirations, and I know this is to be unapologetic or whatever. I need my LTC, and I know how they censoring us and all that. But until we go in and drag them out their house and pump them full of lead while they sleep, it's gonna continue to happen to us.
Oh, shit. Okay, I feel that. I feel you. That's a point. That's a point. That's a point. That's a point.
I think many, and I think you're on the right page. If we keep asking the question, "What's next?" but people are trying that, and I'm not referring to anybody on this panel here. No one wants to state the obvious sometimes, and I think that's what you're alluding to. At some point, you have to look at the extreme notion. It's like, again, the first organized marches in 1917. This is 2020. How many times can you march? I dig everybody on the vote. We have to vote. When we look at Trump, it's more than just removing Trump. It's about looking at his entire cabinet and removing all of them. It's about, the Supreme Court justice appointments. There are a lot of variables that come into play. But again, we're still playing in an all-white playground. So at what point do you say, I don't want to march, I don't want to vote, I don't want to play the game anymore, I'm walking away from it? Is separation a viable option for anyone?
no. I'm gonna jump in because I'm not gonna
Go
be
for it. I'm
divided
listening.
in on this one. So I was raising my iron fist and I couldn't be seen. So now here's the deal with the iron fist. I definitely don't have a problem with the iron fist. The only problem with the iron fist is it's like when you go to the playground and there's 4 of you and you got guys that want to get you, and the three your 3 boys say, yeah, I'm with you, and they with you until you get there to the fight, and then it's only you fighting. So like, I hear many, but just like there's people that talk about voting that don't go out and vote, there's gonna be people that's gonna talk about the armed fist, and you supposed to show up to go snatch somebody out the house, and you're gonna be the only one at the house going there to snatch anybody out. The other thing about the armed fist is when they got shackles on your fist, it's kind of hard to raise that fist. And then you have the Harriet Tubman thing where the shackles have come off the fence, but because you're so Pavlovian centered that the chains are off your fist, you don't even realize you can lift your fist because you just been so trained and housebroken by massa. So I mean, there's just so much that can be said here. Man, listen, if there's gonna be a revolution, then there's gonna be a revolution. It's a known fact that in order for peace, you must prepare for war. And when you prepare for war, you need to let those who you're going to unleash your war machine on realize that your war machine is real and that it needs to be recognized. Or we don't even need to talk about that. Now, we have to work within this existing system as best we can, but we never going to succeed in this system until we succeed in our own system, our system of black people truly helping black people and sticking together with black people. Because even I hear we have to have candidates. We need viable candidates that'll run and do this and that. Listen, in this city, they vote on name recognition first and foremost. 9 out of 10 times, people go to the poll and they see a name they recognize. Oh, I'm gonna vote Bud Williams. I know that name. You don't even know what the platform of the person running against him is. They don't even educate themselves to who's running and what he's running for and what he's running about. So going through that elective system, that ain't gonna do nothing either, because then what happens is, my opinion, and I'm not coming off the code, okay? Because the code is this. Truth is the code. Truth is the code. I'm not gonna lie and I'm not gonna sugarcoat nothing because somebody's black. I'm not gonna hit them with truth. Because the truth of the matter is, we put some of these black people in office, and they turn around and do the same thing to us that the white people were doing to us. Cronyism, taking care of their sons and their daughters and their friends and their nephews, and they don't really take care of their constituents. So they're guilty of doing exactly what Massa was doing to us. They get up there and start feeling and smelling themselves. Oh, they were nothing last year, but this year they standing at the podium with Kennedy, thinking Kennedy was going to win, okay, and they were going to have an end. That was a political move. It wasn't for the good of us. Just like local politicians talking about being transparent. They're transparent about everything except showing that they're not doing nothing for me. Nothing. I don't have a leader here in Springfield. Not one. Not one. Not one. Because none of them have the backbone to talk about what really matters or to do anything that really matters to the people where it really matters. Don't come into the hood and talk about I'm for the hood. Go talk to the person who can change the hood. You know, so yeah. I mean, all this is rhetoric. It's rhetoric. I mean, until somebody steps up and is willing to do it, and don't nobody dare challenge me and say, "Okay, we're gonna have a revolution," yada yada yada. Well, if you're really down, guess who's gonna be there? I'll be there. Try me out. Let's see, because I don't have an agenda, and I ain't seeking nothing in the future from anybody. Yes, I'm talking passionately, Daryl. Don't try to stop that. I'm done now. Thank you very much. Nobody's changing me. Unapologetic.
I wasn't disagreeing. Next up is Minnie. I was not disagreeing. Here we go. Minnie, you're up.
I think we make the mistake of thinking that we need everybody to partake in any one strategy. We need people to stay in their lane, but everybody moving toward a common goal. One band, one sound. I said from the beginning, we need a code, we need an agenda, we need a system, so that you don't find yourself out there with shooters who ain't really shooters. But we got shooters. Don't say that our fists are tied, because we out here getting it in, especially in Bankfield, Massachusetts. Okay, our fists are not tied. It's just not, that energy is not channeled and guided properly. And I heard somebody say that freedom ain't free. If you need freedom, that means it's been taken from you, and you need to match force with force to get it back. We're not shackled. We're unorganized. We don't have no code.
In Springfield.
We don't have no system. We don't have no agenda.
We're not getting nothing in Springfield. Cats shooting at each other. If we getting something in at Springfield, let's march down to City Hall and show me the bullet holes in City Hall. Because I don't care about brothers.
But you saying what I'm saying though, Kev. You don't try to change me. You saying what I'm saying. That okay, it's bullet holes out here, just not in City Hall. That means our fists aren't shackled. That means that we just don't have no direction. We don't have that guidance, and we need to channel that energy into a common goal, and everybody stay in their lane. Like, can we change? Do we need people on the inside of the system? Yes, we do. We need people to relay information, to let us know what's going on, to let us know how it works, but not to change it, not to save it, to burn it down.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll be the outside force. Like, I'll say I don't want bullets at City Hall. Like, there's Daryl Moss works at City Hall. I don't want Daryl Moss getting shot at City Hall. I don't want LeVar Click getting shot at City Hall. So, like, I understand.
Listen, you know good and well that's not what I meant, Ryan. That was
an
analogy, bro. Because if I wanted to shoot somebody, I wouldn't shoot a building in the first place. If you're a shooter, you go shoot your target. You don't shoot buildings. I ain't never killed a car or a house or nothing like that.
I hear you, but I just wanted to be clear. I wanted to be clear on that, though. I wanted folks to be clear on that. Like,
okay.
I shoot, like, I might shoot my own bullets at City Hall, but they're not bullets, right? So, like, people do what they do. So,
and we appreciate
but I do think, yeah, and you know, I mean, me and D's thing that we got to handle ourselves. But, like, I'm not somebody who's gonna back down and let the system kind of work itself out. But with that said, I do think you can burn it down from the inside.
Well, you have to burn it down from the inside, is what I'm saying. But a lot of people want to just build it up in our own image. That's what I don't think is possible or likely to happen anytime soon at this rate.
Sure. And also, when I'm talking about people running for office, yes, not every black person or brown person or poor person or LGBTQ person is going to be the right person. But sometimes a white person who might happen to be a male and rich is the right person. But we need to make sure that there are more options when we talk about voting. And so it's what I do for a living. I'm a political consultant. It's what I've done my entire life as far as the government. And I do think that within the constructs of our government, which was set up to keep us enslaved, I agree with that. But there is enough flexibility to make things happen. I really do believe that. And so while I agree with the iron fist thing and all that stuff, like being tough and not, there's a way to do it within the system, in my opinion.
I agree with you, Ryan, and I would like to just
Hold on, Kev. Before you go, I gotta make sure everybody knows, all of our panelists. I want people to go one at a time, because what happens is, for the folks who are watching on YouTube, for the folks who are watching on Twitter, folks who are watching on Facebook, you really can't, with these types of forums, you can't hear people who are speaking when there are 2 or 3 people speaking at the same time. So what I'm going to ask everyone to do is let people complete their thoughts, and then we'll get you on as quickly as we can so people can respond. The back and forth banter is cool, but I also want to keep the focus on the fact that today we were talking about learning more about both the judicial process and the legislative process. Every other sidebar conversation I've been a part of since I was about 20 years old. I've heard it 1,000 times. But what I haven't heard is how we tackle the judicial process or the legislative. Everything else is easy banter to get into. But I think for all of our viewers, they need to know what they need to do. If the revolution ain't starting tomorrow, then that means we need to start. We need to take a serious look at the court system, and not just as defendants. We need to look at the state legislature and not just as voters. I need people to keep that in mind. It's easy to get distracted and take our eyes off the prize. We are trying to get to the same place. So I'm going to get back to you. Kev, real quick response. Mark, quick response. I know I'm supposed to go Dr. Baldwin and then Hanif, but quick response, folks, so I can get back on path. Here we go. Kev, where you at?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Daryl, for getting us back on point, and I appreciate that. I just like to let it be known. I know Ryan. I respect Ryan and what he does. I respect you and what you do. That was simply an analogy. I would never promote us having anarchy, because that would just, first of all, that's not what I would promote. I feel many in what she's saying as well, because there is a time and a place. Listen, even the Bible tells you there's a time to live, a time to die, there's a time for everything. So there's a time for war. There is a time for war and a time for uprising. And but I do believe we can bring about the change that's necessary within this system that's not even built for us. Because as I stated earlier, it was me that stated that they've already put things on paper that we could use against them if we simply had them enforce it equitably. I'm all for within the system. We need some burning and we need some talking, and we need that iron fist every now and then as well. But I respect everybody that's here. And I would like to make it perfectly clear that no, I'm not promoting anarchy. And if I was going to shoot up City Hall, I'd call Daryl and Ryan up and tell them don't come into work today, because
Well, I don't work at that City Hall, but I hear you.
Definitely call me.
Yeah,
already been
I
neutralized.
got you on speed dial.
You actually call me to tell me to have an alibi.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. But yeah, definitely, man. Listen, much respect to everybody, and I agree. We need both sides. We do need to all have different. There are different lanes. I do agree with that. There are different lanes, and everybody fits in their own lane. But all lanes should be pointing in the same direction, and we should be working in unison, as opposed to not. Um, uh, we definitely do need to utilize the system that is in place, because there are laws on the books. We just need these police to function within them. We need judges that are going, and DAs and AGs that are going to make them make those laws have the same bite for them that it has for us. And I think I'm done for the day. I'm going to sit and listen to everybody else, but I appreciate the opportunity for the forum. And I feel you with the iron fist. I'm all down with the iron fist. The only thing that I would like to say before I get off too is I do have a pet peeve, and it's like, going back to the schoolyard. I never liked cats that talk like they were fighters that wasn't fighters, and I never liked, what I'm saying. Stay in your lane. Had to tell my own nephew, stop hanging with gang members, because you're not a gang member, bro. When it goes down, you gonna be the one person who don't know how to act, because you're not a gang member. All the gang members gonna see the cops 2 blocks away, or see the enemy 2 blocks away, and you're gonna be standing there like you down.
Yeah.
So everybody has their lane, And I just, we need to find that lane. We need to find those who are expert in those lanes, like you did, and you brought the doctor in. I want to thank the doctor for her time, and thank Ryan for his time, because we need to hear, because we need to learn from you the things that we don't know. Man, I learned a whole lot today listening to Ryan in the process. I learned a lot listening to the doctor. So there, I appreciate you bringing the experts in and the more knowledgeable people in that can help us do these things. But I appreciate the passion of many, because as you can see, I don't know how to control myself, man. I just, I just talk. Thank you. I'm done.
Thank you. All right, Mark, you had a comment you want to make?
Oh no. I was listening. I had a few different points. But I was just thinking about a few different points. But no, I would say, just to piggyback off everybody, I feel it's very important for us to confront the legislature and the laws and stuff like that. But just speaking from my own mind, like just my own opinion about things, I feel like the war, it's already been waged. It's already started. You know what I mean? It's been going on. I don't feel like the war is specifically physical, though. Like the war is more of a spiritual war inside of all of us, realizing who we are and where we're going back to, and we're trying to reawaken to ourselves. We're finding ourselves. So it's going to be a long night. It's going to actually continue, I feel like, for a while, until those of us realize who and what we came from, what we really are. And the rest of us, we might actually, a lot of us are going to perish. A lot of us are going to perish. It's not just going to be behind law enforcement. It's going to just be because we don't have the knowledge to move forward into this new world that we're in, outside of everything, So, yeah, I feel like the war is spiritual to a great degree, and it's already begun, and we're on the losing end because we're not confronting that part of it, within ourselves. So I feel like we're going to keep on going for a little while. Yeah, it's not going to get no better because everybody that's brown is fighting. They're really divisive. We can't actually unify, right? And I feel like the reason we can't unify is because unity is bigger than us deciding we want to unify. Like unity is something that is actually inside of you. It's something that's deep down inside of you. So like when you feel unity, everybody comes together because they know what they're up against. And right now we still have a choice whether we want to unify or not, and in a while when things get kind of hotter and hotter and hotter, and then we can kind of put our programs, the mental programs that we've placed on ourselves, that we run in the background every day. I'm a mother, I'm a father, I'm a black man, blah. And we're going to get to the core of what we are. And those people are going to unify, and they're going to be up against the same monster, but it's just going to have grown, because we're going to have to shed some of this programming that we're running. A lot of this black and white programming, Like some of us are realizing that we're not black as it is a nationality or ethnicity, right? We know that we have a nationality and an ethnicity, but some of us are still under like the color of whatever that is, whatever black means in the census, whatever black means in law, or whatever it is, you see. So,
racial identity, that's another conversation. We'll come back to that. We can't hit everything at the same time. Mama, y'all gotta have me ODing, all right?
That's a fact. I feel it's just a spirit. That's all. I'm done. I feel it's just mostly spiritual.
All right, thank you. Hanif, you've been waiting patiently. You hit me up about 30 minutes ago. Next. Oh, Shauna, you got it? Go ahead. All right, Hanif, you're up. And we have 13 minutes left, folks. Let's go.
One thing I think is very important, things that when we talk about this conversation, is the emphasis on staying in your lane. What that really means when it comes to this conversation is that there are those of us in our community that have a gift and have an understanding of how politics works and how the law and the judicial system works. And we need to understand it. That's who we are. Then we need to be in that arena. And those of us that don't have that understanding, instead of trying to act like you do because you see a bright light and you see an opportunity to take advantage, you need to sit your behind down. And you need to back the person that's qualified to be where they're supposed to be. Because part of the problem from the judiciary standpoint is we have so many people, and Kevin, I believe, said this, about specifically saying about Black people who come into office and then they do the same thing that they were complaining about, and they don't do anything for the communities that they're coming from. So we have to make sure that when we're talking about the judiciary and the things that we're learning, that we now take the opportunity to discover those people who are in positions, who do understand these things, and back these candidates, those people who have a gift of the law, who are lawyers, who are aspiring to be judges. Some of these judges are elected. We gotta stand behind those judges, and those that are appointed just like Ryan talked about influencing legislation, we got to talk to all elected officials to influence who these people are picking to get on those judicial benches as well.
All right. All right, we are at the 10-minute mark. So at this point, Dr. Baldwin, there was something in the chat that you mentioned. I see Shauna, our background producer, asked you to mention regarding Elaine Brown.
Oh, yes. A part of some of the webinars that I host at Western New England, the Wellen Davis seminar will be held on October 29th, and it will be former Minister of Information and chairperson of the Black Panther Party in Oakland, the founding chapter, Elaine Brown. She will be our guest speaker. So I ask that you all join us, because she's going to be talking a lot about what Ms. Jones was bringing up about what's the Black agenda today, and that is it enough to just be marching and saying Black Lives Matter? And so I asked you all to come aboard, and you can find her. I'll try to send the link over to Mr. Moss and his assistant to make sure you all have the link to that.
That'd be valuable. Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for coming on. I'm deeply appreciative for all of our viewers. Of course, we're not going to answer all your questions. None of us have the answer to absolutely everything, but our job is to make sure that we present this information to the public. People can weed out what they don't need and take in what they want. So I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank Mark. Thank you so much for being here. Dr. Baldwin, I appreciate you. Ryan, for people who don't know, me and Ryan have a history that hasn't always been colorful, but when we talk about unity and like letting bygones be bygones and moving forward, as men, we've been able to do that. So the bottom line is, regardless of whether or not you agree or disagree with someone, like them or dislike them, when they have a work ethic and they have a body of work that you respect that. And you learn to put all your differences to the side, you shake hands and you keep it moving. Ryan, I'm glad we can be an example of brothers coming together and getting this work in. Is that cool with you?
Absolutely, man. I appreciate it 100%. It happens, right? And so cats aren't always going to be on the same teams, right? So we're not always going to be on the same team, but we got to respect what we do and lick our wounds after we have our little battles and keep it 100. And so I've always respected D Moss, because D Moss is the man. He is. And so it hurt me that me and him had our little thing. But, you know, during this last thing, since the Floyd murder, it's been like, I can't let this happen, right? You know, so we can't let it happen. So I'm glad and humbled that you invited me to be on here today. And hopefully it's a step forward for us having our relationship back to where it used to be, because you're the man. I always respected you.
And back at you, respect you as well. You introduced me to the state legislature with Jared Barrios. I'll never forget that.
Oh, Jared Barrios. Yeah. Back in the day.
So again, thank you. So at this time, I want everybody to just take a minute. Any closing thoughts? And Brian, since we have you on screen, any closing thoughts you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I mean, in closing, you know, I've said vote, and I'm here to talk about the legislature, but the legislature also impacts the judiciary, which Mark was saying earlier, or Hanif was saying that earlier. And you know, while we don't elect judges in Massachusetts, we elect governor's counselors, and the governor's counselors elect judges, right? And so the governor will put forward a judge or somebody to be a judge, and the governor's counselors, who we elect, are the ones who vote whether or not that person should be a judge. We elect our DAs. We elect our mayors, who pick our police commissioners. And so I get it that we've been voting for a long time and it doesn't seem that progress has been made, but we really need to vote. Like if everybody voted, it would be a different place. And so it's slow, but I'm here to tell you, like, let's vote. And and on top of it, to Kevin's point, and Kevin's my man too, because Kevin did a lot for Suit Up Springfield, which I hold dearly to my heart. Hold people accountable. So if we vote, whether a person's black, brown, or whatever, if they're not doing what we ask them to be doing, then vote them out and get somebody else to vote to be there and take their place. And again, to Hanif's point, there's certain people who should be running for office, and there's certain people who shouldn't be. And sometimes those people who shouldn't be keep running over and over and over again. But let's all find those people who should be running for office. And sometimes what they need is a little kick in the butt, because a lot of times they're humble people. They're very well accomplished. They're talented. They just need to hear 10 or 12 other humble, talented people to tell them, if you run, I got you, right? So we have to be more organized, more deliberate about who we're putting to run for office, and not just always trying to back whoever is willing to do it. So thank you again for this time, D.
You're welcome. Mark, closing thoughts, sir?
Nah, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, D-Moss. Appreciate everything. All the speakers, very intelligent conversation. I really appreciate the opportunity. Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us, bro. Dr. Baldwin.
No problem.
Closing comments.
I totally agree with everything everybody has said. I would say that we just have to keep on fighting, being at the forefront, filing civil lawsuits for violation of civil rights, suing for injunctions to stop certain types of police brutality, being visible, lobbying to remove qualified immunity, and just holding every part of the system, judges, lawyers, DAs, police officers, every part of the system accountable for their role.
Okay, thank you. Hanif, closing thoughts on today's show.
You know, this is a very important conversation, and like a lot of our conversations, this definitely needs a part two. And I will say this, you know, everyone that's watching, that's listening, no matter what platform it's on, take the time to educate yourself about your local representatives. Take the time to find out if your city, your jurisdiction, wherever you live, because we got people that watch this from around the world, wherever you live, find out how this process works for judges to be put in office, for your legislators, and then do something about it. It's not enough to talk about how bad it is if you're not willing to roll up your sleeves and do something, whatever that something is. As Minnie has said, find your lane and stay in it. You know, or as one of my favorite pro wrestlers of all time, from when I used to be a big pro wrestling fan, The Rock would say, know your role and shut your mouth. Just go do the work.
Well, all right.
I just want to say that to piggyback to what everyone else said, is we're being attacked on all fronts. So we need to fight back on all fronts. You know, we need the politicians, we need the law enforcement, we need the spiritual workers, and so on and so forth. But like I've always said, we need a code, we need an agenda, we needed a system. Because I don't necessarily agree that if everybody voted that things would be different. But if we vote in blocks, like Kwame Ture suggests, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael, then we can make a difference. We have to leverage our voices, especially because we don't have that much power when it comes to these arenas. So we need to come together and do things as a collective, so that, you know, if all the people, if all the Black and brown people in one city said, we're going to vote for you if you do this, this, and this, that's how we leverage that vote to get what we want, for sure. So I'm all for voting, but we need some tact. We need some strategy. We need a code, an agenda, and a system.
Well, all right. Kevin Dumpson, where's he at? Hold on. Yep, he's here. All right, Kevin.
I'm here.
Closing
All
thoughts.
right, thank you. Yes, sir. First of all, as always, I want to thank you, Darryl Moss, for this platform, the opportunity. I do it every week because I mean it every week. I appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate what you're attempting to do within our community. I appreciate that. I appreciate each and every one of the panelists, and I respect each and every one of you. I thank you for what you bring to the table. Thank you to the guest, Dr. Baldwin. We appreciate your knowledge. My man Ryan, we thank you. We appreciate your knowledge. Minnie, I appreciate your passion. It seems like, I guess, you and I are the passionate ones. So I appreciate that, because you don't leave me alone, and we get passionate too. I would like to say this right now on this platform here. Okay, I'm going to run for office. So I want to know if I'm going to have somebody's backing that's on this panel, because I've run for office before. I'm even going to shave my face when I run, man. Well, maybe I won't shave, but I'm serious, because I believe we do need new voices, and voices that are going to be willing to stand up. See, but I'm not part of anybody's political machine, though. I've been in the game a long time. So I agree. We're being attacked on every front. We need to respond on every front. We do need people to stay in their lanes. And I'm willing to jump into that lane.
Okay.
I think we need people who are willing to sincerely represent the constituents that they're asking to vote them in. With that having been said, don't be surprised when you see Kevin J. Dumpson for state senate or something like that. All right.
All
Thank
right. All right. And again, I want to thank everyone. I'll remind everyone this Friday, actually not a reminder, my first announcement, this Friday, 7 o'clock, right here on the same platform, we'll be talking with Dwayne Hendricks. He's the author and spokesperson for the Wayne Williams Freedom Project. If anybody remember the Atlanta child murders back in the 80s, well, they're reopening that case. Apparently, there was far more to it than what was presented by the media. So we'll have the spokespersons for Wayne Williams, along with Dwayne Hendricks, some of the lead investigators down in Atlanta, on with us this Friday night. It'll be myself, Andrew Keaton. And I think this is going to be a two-part series. So for anyone familiar with the Atlanta child murders, you might want to tune in next Friday, 7 o'clock, same platform, getting the information out. That's all we can do. We want to thank everybody for being here. And till next Sunday, everybody, much love, much love, much love. And we out. Peace.